Well, we'll wait till quantum really comes around in mainstream before we expect it to go.
Hopefully we could be less wasteful in total. And also, you know this, and I know this, and so does Chris, but it speaks to right now, Chia could become the more decentralized option, because at the moment, with the way things are being mined, there's a lot of centralization going on. And how do we?
The Bitcoin mining operations do tend to be very large operations. It's not all that decentralized at all, and the pools are even bigger. So yeah,
and it's the #1 energy consumption in some Eastern European country that I can't remember off the top of my head now.
Yeah, it's all pretty unpleasant that way.
Yeah, and that's part of the reason why we're having it, because being able to do this in a green way is a very important part of what's next as we look to put the next billion people into being able to trade value using these technologies.
Yeah. You don't want it to be getting worse as it gets, as it gets more people getting involved in it. And there's also things where, like, there's a lot of people who want to do like NFTs or places that want to issue carbon credits, and they don't want to do this on a blockchain. That's bad for the environment.
So what do you think we need to do from here, from where we are today, to move into 3.1 to really deliver on the promise?
Well, there's a lot of just building up infrastructure to get there. That for a lot of end users, not just like there being NFTs. NFTs are pretty neat, but to have things that actually matter for the web as a whole, it needs to scale to a huge number of people. And for that, you really need payment channel networks. And that needs to be integrated so that lots of people can get on these things in the first place. There's a lot of just real world infrastructure that has to happen for that to really get there. So that's going to be some amount of time for that to happen.
And could you give a little definition for those who don't know? What is a payment channel network, and how is that different from a chain or some of these other elements?
Well, it's built on top of a blockchain, right? So when you have like banks, just banks in the regular banking industry, they don't send money to each other for every single transaction that happens. If you go to a corner store and buy a candy bar, it's not like there's a Fed wire for $1.25 that's that goes through. That would be ridiculous. You have things that are happening, and then it nets out between the vendor and the banks actually net out between each other and result in very few transactions actually going through on the back end of the whole thing, which is like the Fedwire system. Now, the Fedwire looks an awful lot like the blockchain in terms of the transaction rate that's on it, and I think it's something like 40 transactions a second or something, amortized across everything. And then like the cost is like $20 a transaction or something. You get this very, it looks a lot like a blockchain. And a lot of the same thing carries over, that you want to do things via net settlement on a blockchain, just moving it off of Fedwire. Although I think there's a high probability that Fedwire at some point in the future will offer CLVM, that's the Chia-less virtual machine, as an API for doing things on that, because it's just a better way of doing things, where they absolutely would not do that with EVM, no way. When banks are doing this, there's a lot of credit, like small amounts of credit going through the whole system. That's why they're called credit cards, right? And with cryptocurrencies, you really don't want to do that. You want to be settling out exactly the whole time. So instead, what you do is you make it so that people kind of post money beforehand, and then they're just kind of leaking it out over time. They're releasing bits of it as they do these transactions, and you net settle out in the end of the whole thing. That's what payment channel networks do. So you have a few transactions to get things started on chain, and only afterwards do you kind of settle up. If someone finishes paying out everything, or there's a problem, then you go to chain. But mostly you try to avoid having transactions on chain, and that makes it so transactions can go through like almost immediately, and it can scale to many, many more things.
So
awesome.
Thank you. What are you excited about in the space? What do you see 5-10 years from here, since you're the visionary?
In terms of things I'm excited about, well, there's a bunch of neat stuff we're working on at Chia, we're working on NFTs. We're working on some on-chain gaming. We have asset tokens. We're working on getting things like carbon credits to be tokenized on-chain and getting very liquid exchange of those going in terms of having AMMs and decentralized exchange and bringing real value there. That's a very good use of blockchains. Something that I'm very excited about that other people don't tend to get too excited about is better custody arrangements. I think, Bitcoin feels like carrying around suitcases full of $100 bills, and that's not how you want to do things. And when you use a bank, the bank is providing some custodial services to you. They're doing it in a way that is completely not transparent and that you have no control over whatsoever, but they are providing some kind of rate limiting and other types of services in control and recovery for your funds. And in blockchains have to date been worse for this. In principle, they should be able to be much better, that they have much better processes that the end user has complete control over and total transparency into. But people aren't excited about working on that, so they're not. So I'm excited about it because I think money should be secure. I don't like people's funds getting stolen. So I'm working on that right now.
Couldn't agree with you more. And actually, one of the things that I look back and when I was at Future of Money and meeting Vitaly and all the people in the early days, that's one of the things that really got me was thinking about, wow, I'm going to have so much responsibility. And people they showed me their cold wallets, they showed me their seed phrases and all the other stuff. And went, this is a lot of work. And over the last couple of days, what I really have been sitting at and looking at was the idea that we're really going from what was the lazy web to what I don't have a better word, but is an active web now, where people could just kind of lean back and everything's happening. They're using their Facebook as their identity to log in. And it's really easy. I don't have to do the password every time and everything else. But now when we start getting this stuff, I've got to have a cold wallet. I've got to have that passphrase written somewhere and backed up properly. I have to have multi-custodial signatures when we get to real assets. And even though one of my wallets only has like a bit pence, a 0.01 of a Bitcoin in it, I'm worried about it. So I'm constantly now engaged with thinking about those things. And I'm just wondering, like, is that, I think that's where the custodial option starts solving for it, right? Where we have some of those things done a little easier for us. So it's not all on an individual because humans are lazy.
Right. There's a bunch of rules that people use for this. So Bitcoin supports multi-sig. So that's what everything is based off of. And that's something. But when you have multi-sig, you want like the ability to rekey it, right? You say, oh, wait, I lost one of those. Like there's 3 people and one of them needs to be replaced. You want some way of replacing them in your multi-sig without things getting interrupted, right? If one of them, if like say 2 of them try to do something bad, right? So someone gains access to 2 of the 3 keys, so now they're able to spend, but the honest parties still have access to all 3. They want to be able to stop those payments and pull the money out, right? There are other kinds of business logic you might want, right? You might want a wallet that's rate limited in that you can spend money out of it at a certain rate, but if it ever gets hacked or stolen, there's some other key that you keep in cold storage that is not subject to that rate limit, so you can drain the whole thing completely, right? You might want a wallet, you might want something that's kind of the opposite threat model, where you're worried that you are going to lose your physical hardware. So you have this like seed phrase, right? That's backed up somewhere. But now you're worried about someone compromising that, right? You kept it in your attic or something and somebody goes and finds it and steals all your money. So maybe you want a setup where if someone tries to do a recovery from those keys, that first off, they have to pony up some amount of money as a deposit to try and get the funds back. And if it turns out that your hardware wallet wasn't actually lost, you can stop that recovery attempt and keep the deposit that they put down, right? Which is great. If your physical hardware wallet dies, you can still get the funds back. But now if someone steals those keys, they don't get to steal everything in your wallet. And so there are times when that might be a more appropriate threat model to have. These are the kinds of business logic rules you might want to support out of more appropriate and more sophisticated custodial arrangements.
Well, that makes me really excited knowing that you're excited about that and that you're focused on that, because I think it's going to be a huge element of getting to the next step with all of this. And when I was thinking back again to the early days, what I also heard around that conversation was a lot of anarchists, fire sale sort of stuff. Like we're going to take over the entire currency system and it's going to be replaced. And, that's hopefully not how it happens. But you had always been with this and what you've just explained, thinking about real world, real human issues in terms of their use of this technology. And I'm really glad that you're doing that. I wish more people would.
Yeah, the price of Bitcoin is like the least interesting part of it from my point of view. And it's what everyone's excited about. People like number go up. So
yeah, and that's been to our detriment with mainstream media over the last couple of months in particular, because it's all about, the golf course and the Constitution and all these other things. And there's so much more here, and that's what we wanted to get to. And I think what you were speaking to in terms of those scenarios that you're planning for in the custodial are real world problems that real people face in trying to transact business with one another. And taking that approach and working with the bank systems and working with the Fedwire and some of the other stuffs and making it work together, I think is a great transition plan for us to move forward into the future. So what are you doing in that regards? Are you doing anything on the back end?
Well, we're
with
working
like existing EFTs or ETFs and the rest of it.
Well, we're working towards getting tokenization to happen. We have a stable coin on Chia right now. Working on getting more. Working on getting like wrapped Bitcoin and Ethereum on Chia. We're working on a lot of things.
Yeah, no, you don't need to give the whole roadmap. That's good, but I'm glad to hear that. And again, it's in the right direction. And that's why I really wanted to feature you and have more people see what you're doing.
Oh, I'm going to ask the interesting question, which is, what do you think about, the federal government's getting into digital banking?
Well, I think like a central bank digital currency really makes a lot of sense as a thing, but the way it should be done is that the central bank issues a stable coin on an appropriate chain. That's kind of the right way of doing it. Often people kind of in principle say, oh, we want to do a central bank digital currency, but by the time it gets through the bureaucracy and the committees and such, it becomes something that's not useful in any way, shape, or form, and it's not getting, well, usually it's not even using a blockchain, it's using a private blockchain, meaning it's a regular database, right? But even with things that are in some sense regular databases, there's nothing particularly stopping banks or Fedwire, like I said, from having a very lightly trusted ledger of deposits of who owns what in them, so that you could do all these kinds of custodial things and payments, like I'm saying, on their ledger, and just check with them about what the current status of everything is. That has a lot going for it as an approach, but due to just things in the world, it's a lot easier to deploy that kind of improved on-chain programming thing on this like blockchain that nobody controls than on a blockchain that somebody controls. Yeah, that's kind of the problem, that when you do the central bank things, that they should be doing it. It would be great if they did it. They have some real concerns, that they have the same, environmental concerns as everyone about doing stuff on Bitcoin and about its like throughput and such. But there's this other layer of concerns of they want too much control. They're trying to preserve all the regulations that exist in banking instead of viewing it as analogous to cash. Like banks subsidize cash a lot, like they actually print the money as the subsidy for cash transactions, so that they're okay with doing that in that context. But I think the mindset of doing stuff with blockchains needs to be thinking of it as being cash, not thinking of it as being banks, in order for it to be successful. And they haven't been working on it that way.
If I may, so Bram, over the last couple of years, you've now been working on this probably for 8 or 9 years, but 5 years with Chia, kind of more of a focus. What surprised you about the last several years? What happened that like you didn't expect to happen? And then what did you hope would happen that hasn't yet?
Well, this just kind of ossification of Bitcoin has kind of surprised me. That Bitcoin development was a lot more exciting a number of years ago, and now a number of people have really been burnt out and left, and the culture around it has gotten really, well, everyone talks about how toxic it's gotten, and that's driven away a lot of developers in the process, and people there are actually talking about ossification as a feature. And I'm not sure how much of that is the money people not wanting those nerds being around doing stuff. But that's been a really unfortunate thing to have happen, the ossification and increasing toxicity of Bitcoin itself, because Bitcoin does, help with a number of things. On the tech side, zero knowledge proofs are really do a lot more than anyone expected them to be able to do. Those have become extraordinarily powerful as like an actually practical piece of technology that you can actually deploy. So that's really surprised me in a positive direction.
Excellent. Yeah, and I have to actually look up ossification, so I'm gonna have to look that up, admittedly. But I understand what you mean. It means like it's people are spreading out, they're heading away, and they're turning away from it. But what I've been seeing is that same sort of thing. And knowing what we went through with Web 2 and how that became a movement, and yes, it is just a slogan and a marketing phrase and all that, absolutely, we understand that. But it's also the symbol that represents that energy. And I've seen, particularly again in the last several months, a lot of negativity being put around that, a lot of scams, a lot of other people coming in and taking advantage of those who don't have knowledge and understanding. And that's particularly bad in the NFT space, but we won't go there right now. So we're with you on that. That's part of the reason why we're doing this.
Yeah, it's particularly unfortunate that the beachhead, which everyone gets excited about, that the public hears about, is number go up. And of course, as soon as number stops going up, that all falls to pieces. And it makes the whole thing look, well, extremely greedy and not very innovative at all. Well, and there is a lot of real technology there. I'll take what I can get, right? Like the funding model of cryptocurrencies is the actual currencies itself. It's better than nothing. At least I get to work on actually improving money, which I wouldn't be able to do otherwise. But it would be nice if people got more excited about the actual tech than just it being this like game of we're rich, woohoo.
Exactly, because that brings the wrong sort of people. I mean, I did my first company in Miami. I know about gold diggers. We ran into them for 50 years in Miami, so we know about that. So I'm really glad to hear you share that, and also that you still have optimism for it, because we do see that the underlying technology provides real social value. So I guess that's my last question here before passing it back to Tina, which is when Chia is fully deployed and you've got a really robust ecosystem and you've built out a lot of the things you've been talking about and that you started alluding to in your hit list of what's ahead, what does society look like differently then than it does now?
Well, I'm leery of claiming that society will be fundamentally different. It's not like society is completely dysfunctional. I mean, in some parts of the world it is. So in those places, you might see like a really big difference. So in the United States, people aren't terribly worried about waking up one day and their savings in the bank has just disappeared. So there are parts of the world where this is a very real concern, right? So you have, but it's the promise of banking. Banking is not something people get excited about. People get excited about, well, truth be known, the traditional banking industry has much of the same dysfunction as cryptocurrency does in general. People getting excited about asset bubbles is something that's been around for a very long time. But yeah, particularly around derivatives and such, those cause all manner of trouble. But there's high finance and low finance, and high finance is what causes all the trouble. And low finance is really important for the world and society, like just basic clearing and price discovery and making it so that commerce can actually happen, and so that you can even buy very big expensive things like cars and houses and stuff, right? Like blockchains don't do anything magical for credit. Credit is, you can't have loans without credit worthiness. That's not a thing. People who claim that blockchains have some magical solution to that are scam artists. But you can definitely make it so that the actual payments happen securely, and that when you're comparison price shopping, you can be pretty sure that you're getting a good price and you know what's going on here. These are things that blockchains can definitely help with. And a lot of the modern world becoming possible has been because financing has become possible at scale. And yeah, and you couldn't do it without that. So I think improving that everywhere is a good thing.
Bram, I got a really important question. Is money real?
Money is very real. There's a question of why do we care about money? And this is kind of an important and subtle point. Money is a Schelling point. Money is money because everyone agrees that it's money, right? And this is true of all forms of money. This is very much including Bitcoin. It's not like Bitcoin magically has a whole bunch of properties. Bitcoin, the technology has a bunch of properties, but it has value because everyone agrees that they care about it as being Bitcoin. Right? And this is also true of like gold and the dollar, that people collectively have agreed to treat this as money going forwards and continue to do so. Actually, gold, they stopped doing that a while ago. So gold's gotten kind of ridiculous over time. But money always, first and foremost, is a Schelling point for being a medium of exchange that people are doing. And that's why it matters. So people start freaking out about, wait, it's not backed, right? Like people could do X, Y, and Z. It's like, well, the thing is, people could always do X, Y, and Z if everyone in the world just agreed to redefine what money was. It's the Schelling point that matters more than anything.
Thank you very much. Yeah, and actually, that's been one of my concerns. Just closing this up, and that's why Bitcoin it was first. It got all this attention. It got all this energy. All these people believe it. They put their own assets into it to make it worth more. We have limited supply and demand, or we have supply and demand economics at play here in terms of the value and how strongly people feel in the confidence of the economy, of the asset, of everything else going on in the world. And so when we start looking at alternative currencies arising, because not every chain is trying to be a currency, some of them are doing other things, but doesn't that require some sort of critical mass in order to truly support it, you know, beyond the short-term sort of hype cycle?
Well, for cryptocurrencies, you do get general agreement about what they are. People have tried to subvert that with Bitcoin. You have like Bitcoin Cash and Bitcoin whatever, but variants, right? Those did not succeed in subverting what people viewed as the Schelling point for what Bitcoin is. But definitely, Bitcoin has this like head start on that, right? It has an advantage over everything else. It's especially just in simple money with its kind of, in some sense, low aspirations. It has this head start of being accepted more places, having more widespread support for it already, and a whole long list of things. But that doesn't mean that something else can't subvert it. It just means something else that subverts it needs to be quite a bit better, right? You have these examples of things that looked like they were non-subvertible and just got obliterated, like Alta Vista and Yahoo and MySpace. You know, you get these things that are just
Flickr even.
Yeah, there's lots and lots of, and Friendster, right? There's lots of these things that just had a huge head start, but then just weren't as good as the competition and they fell behind. But there is a strong tendency for entrenched players to win. When you have a Schelling point, it's harder than anything to subvert the Schelling point. This is why you have things like exchanges, things like the New York Stock Exchange, right? That running an exchange is a really, really simple business model because it doesn't even have to be very good. That it has more liquidity than everything else, so it gets better price discovery and more liquidity. It just feeds on itself. Everyone agrees the market is in this location and they're all going to go to that location. And if you think, you know, that's not a good place physically to have the market, like I don't know, it rains and gets muddy or something, so we should move it over there. But then if there's no central authority that's in control of where the market is and everyone just individually agrees, then if just a few people move to the better location, it's not going to be much of a market. So that's going to be a big problem.
Exactly. Thank you.
A huge part of why there's so much focus on price. It's actually sort of PR engineered that way from some people who do constantly want more and more people in the space, which is good for the space, but also needs to keep the value up. So, and then
Yeah,
you have this problem with,
at some point you need to build real value, and number go up is not in and of itself building real value. Like,
yeah, that's the biggest challenge. When number go up is focal, that's when the good innovators drop out.
yeah.
Unfortunate, because it gets
It should, the direction of causality should be there's real tech that builds real value that makes the number go up. That's the way it should work.
Well, we have been very fortunate to be joined here at Web3 today by Bram Cohen of Chia.net, by the way, if you're looking for them online, very easy to find them that way. Bram, one last thing here before we go. What's going on with Chia? Is there anything you want people to know about so we can send them your way?
Yeah, if you go to Chia.net, you can farm yourself on your own machine. If you have extra space on your hard drive, you can download Chia and start farming it just today. And also, if you're a developer, there's lots of promise of new things to be done in Chia Lisp on top of Chia, a lot more versatility and power than you get in other systems, and a big opening for people to learn it before everybody else does. So you can come along, find out about that at chialisp.com.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And of course, if you're doing that, you're becoming a part of the solution to what is going to be Web 3.1, a more environmentally friendly, a secure and distributed system. And of course, you're also supporting a great guy with a great team and being a part of the broader community there as well. And you can tell your friends you were there early. So that's also a nice thing you can do, and you're not going to miss out on that. But really, really grateful for your time today. Tina, any last thoughts before we go ahead and wrap up here?
No, just thank you for, your time as always, and also your time in working for the solutions and a better future.
Yeah, it gives me great hope to know that there are people with your brains out there working in this direction, because all too often people forget the context into which they're deploying the technologies. And I know that's something that you think deeply about. So thank you.
Thank you.